can't really get Alabama until you get outside in Alabama. SeekAlabama.com is a new guide by Innovate Alabama that helps innovators discover the Alabama outdoors. Start exploring at SeekAlabama.com.
We all want the best of both. Dessert without calories, luxury without expense. And how about security without passwords? With Okta, it's possible. We secure identity so you can safely use any technology. Okta, the world's identity company.
I'm Yasmin Gagne.
I'm Josh Christensen.
And this is Most Innovative Companies. On today's episode, Fast Company contributing writer Will Leitch.
I was surprised how quickly the leagues were so willing and eager to throw themselves into it.
Political organizer David Hogg.
For our candidates, that's part of the power of them being so young is they have the audacity to believe that change is possible.
And as always, keeping tabs.
What is happening? Whatever artist they're commissioning to make specifically the faces of these sports stars is wild.
But first, here's the download. The news you need to know this week in the world of business and innovation.
Alphabet reported $88.3 billion in sales for the third quarter. That's up 15% from the previous year and roughly $2 billion more than analysts' projections. More good news for Alphabet. Their self-driving car company, Waymo, also raised $5.6 billion from outside investors. I was in San Francisco last week and saw Waymo cars for the first time. They're all over the place.
Are they self-driving?
They're self-driving. No, they're self-driving. It's freaky. I'm not used to it.
I don't like that. Anyway, It's Halloween today, unless you're listening to this the day after this episode published, in which case it is half-price candy at CVS Day, aka my favorite day of the year. This year, Americans have spent an estimated $11.6 billion on this one-night holiday. For context, that is roughly the same amount of money as Americans spend on children's books each year.
And 1/8 of what Alphabet made in the third quarter. Who needs books? Get a Kindle, kids.
Yeah, fuck books. You heard it here.
Heard it here. Stay in school, kids. Fuck books. Eat the rich. The New York Stock Exchange announced it will be extending after-hours trading because everything's sexier after hours. No. Nope. We'll be extending after-hours trading. Trading hours are currently 4 a.m. to 8 p.m. Eastern Time. This change extends electronic exchange hours now to be from 1:30 a.m. to 11:30 p.m. Eastern Time. This is just Monday through Friday, by the way. I was going to be like, who needs to trade stocks at 1:30 p.m.? But it's a global thing. There's time zones.
And addicts.
Yeah, and addicts and degenerates. More on that later.
Yep.
So that's 22 hours a day, 5 days a week now. This news comes amid competition from alternative mobile platforms like Robinhood, friend of the pod, Vlad Tenev. Should we call him a friend of the pod? I don't know how I feel about that.
I actually, on a personal level, really like the guy.
I did really like him.
Yeah.
Companies had some issues. Nice guy.
Yeah, nice guy, though. Pretty nice guy.
Anyways, Robinhood and other platforms like it have made trading certain stocks and ETFs accessible by app 24 hours a day, 5 days a week. Meanwhile, cryptocurrency is just like Waffle House, 24/7, rain, snow, sleet, hurricane, tornado, apocalypse.
And once again, I'll say, it's time to buy some NFTs. Just kidding. Don't do that.
I got my stupid-looking ape.
So remember a couple months ago when people on TikTok were posting about an infinite money glitch at Chase Bank ATMs that let you withdraw money from your account before a check bounced?
Drop the audio.
Banks had to warn people not to follow a TikTok trend that takes advantage of a glitch in their system.
By the time the bank realizes, you'll already have free money.
But you committed check fraud.
What?
Yeah, it's a crime.
Well, JP Morgan Chase has begun suing those customers who took advantage of the glitch.
The most predictable.
I know. The bank is going after some of those who withdrew the highest amounts of cash. So if you withdrew like $20, you may be safe.
Yeah, you may be. Yaz, I gotta go. I gotta call my lawyer.
It's actually funny. Somebody accidentally Venmo'd $2,500 to my husband.
Oh, shit.
And he's like tried to return it several times. They keep canceling. But he's like, I also don't want to spend it in case I get arrested. So it's sitting in my account. We decided we're waiting a year. We're waiting a year. And
Put
then
it on the cow. I know you were trying to like negotiate him down.
You know I did. I was like, buy me some Prada.
You know how much, you know how much Gucci I can get on the real. And now it's time for everyone's favorite subject, election news. How's everyone doing right now? I feel like this is a parasocial relationship, so you can't respond to me, but just know, like, I'm here for you. Not literally, but slide into my DMs and then I'll ignore you. Anyways, we're 5 days out from the end of voting, so here's a lightning round of what you need to know. First up, members of the Trump family, the Biden administration employees, and State Department officials were among those targeted by hackers linked to China who were able to break into our telecommunications company system. This just highlights how foreign interference in American elections has become far more sophisticated and far more difficult to track.
Earlier this week, Trump and Kamala made their closing arguments. Vice President Harris gave a speech at the Ellipse in D.C., famously where Trump held his January 6, 2021 rally. She reiterated her economic agenda and highlighted the contrast between herself and her opponent. Meanwhile, Donald Trump hosted a rally featuring crude and racist insults at New York's MSG.
Shout out Tony Hinchcliffe. Kill Tony, baby. Just imagine if Tom Brady didn't invite him to be on the roast of Tom Brady.
I legit had never heard of this man.
He's on TikTok. The Kill Tony stuff comes up if you're on comedy TikTok. He's just another white male comedian.
Sure.
He's fine. It's fine. He's not fine, but he's
Anyway,
fine.
The campaign was kind of a clusterfuck.
Yeah, didn't go great. Do you remember the tweet Donald Trump had before the January 6th rally where he's like, show up at the Ellipse in D.C.?
Stand down.
No, not that one. The Will Be Wild.
Oh, yeah.
That's how Kamala Harris should have marketed this. Come to the Ellipse on November, whatever it was, October 30th. Will Be Wild. And finally, the U.S. Supreme Court denied on Tuesday a bid by former independent presidential candidate Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who has endorsed Republican Donald Trump, of course, to be removed from the ballot in Wisconsin and Michigan for this upcoming election. Kennedy said he wants his voters who would have backed him to cast their ballot for Trump.
And that's the news you need to know today. So, Josh, I want to make a bet with you on air.
I'm down.
If we get to 500 reviews on Apple Podcasts, is it only Apple Podcasts? Should I do Spotify as well?
No, just Apple Podcasts. No. Get these droid listeners out of here.
Would you get a Fast Company tattoo?
For 500 reviews on the podcast?
Yeah.
Can we make it 1,000 reviews on the podcast?
750.
Okay, for 750 reviews on Apple Podcasts.
I will be writing all of those fucking reviews.
No,
different people.
I will get a Fast Company tattoo. A Fast Company themed tattoo.
What if it's just the word innovation?
No, if you...
On your
listeners, if you... No, I'm not doing that. It won't be anywhere visible. 750 reviews is a lot. Like, people actually have to go on and write those reviews.
I will be
do that.
I will be mobilizing this whole office.
Like, listen, okay. But if you're going to read a review and you want to see me get a tattoo on social media, on our TikTok or something like that, you also have to share this with a friend. We can't track this. This is an honor system. Yeah. Spread this around. 750 reviews on Apple Podcasts. Mm-hmm. And I will get a Fast Company tattoo.
What if the Fast Company team tattoo is my signature?
Oh, yeah. My wife would be very happy with me getting Yasmin Gagne.
No, Yaz.
Yes. Yazzie G.
Yeah, Yazzie G. Exactly.
Okay, fine. I feel like now I'm regretting doing this next segment where we're talking about sports betting. Because this is what our banter segment became.
Is this the moment where you realized you had a problem?
Yeah, this is the moment where I realized I had a problem.
So in 2018, the Supreme Court opened the door for states to legalize sports betting. And since then, major U.S. sports leagues have gone all in on this news market. There was a recent study that found that up to 20% of any given sports game broadcast is literally just sportsbook advertising. So, which is so nuts.
That's insane.
So we want to chat with somebody who's written a bit about this in our latest issue. And joining us for the first time on the show is Fast Company contributing writer Will Leitch. Welcome to the show, Will.
Thank you for having me. It's a delight to be here. I'm happy to poison your ears with my lies and bad statistics.
Now, before we get to the questions, you've had kind of an insane career. You have a book out. You have a podcast. Just tell us about that up top so our listeners also pay attention to you.
Oh, well, hopefully my dulcet tones will keep them riveted throughout. But yeah, so no, I'm a writer. I'm probably most famous for founding the sports website Deadspin many years ago. But I write novels. I write for New York Magazine, the Washington Post regularly, and then I write novels. My novel How Lucky came out to HarperCollins. I have a new novel next year coming out called Lloyd McNeil's Last Ride. And I get to write books. I get to write for a living. I live in Athens, Georgia, and do nothing to listen to 90s alt rock and write books. And chase my children around the house for the stuff of mine that they've misplaced.
We'll put all those links in show notes, mostly to the 90s alt-rock music.
Yeah,
but also
yeah. So we're here to talk about sports betting. I know sports betting because it is FanDuel is advertised on every single podcast I listen to. But sports gambling actually kind of took off not that long ago. It was legalized in some states back in 2018. Tell us where things are. Catch us up on where this is all going.
Yeah, it is not an accident that you are hearing FanDuel ads on everything. I actually had to airbrush the tattoo off of my face.
Right.
That FanDuel has actually put together at some point. FanDuel is obviously one of them, DraftKings, many other ones. But I think one of the key things is when gambling was legalized, essentially by the Supreme Court, allowing it to be legal in any state that wanted to have it. It didn't really so much just legalize gambling. What it did was encourage leagues to get involved in it. And I think for decades, for centuries, really, gambling in sports was verboten. Willie Mays and Mickey Mantle were once suspended by baseball for a year for serving as greeters for a casino. Like, this was the third rail that sports would never, ever touch. And now one of the things that's most remarkable to watch any sporting event or to listen to any sports podcast is how gambling is so integrated into the broadcast. So this is a $4 billion a year to the four major professional sports leagues that they get from gambling. And if you, the sportsbook business itself, that's gone to, I think the last estimate was 11 billion in 2023. If you watch a matchup, you really can't miss. Like, the guy will go to the free throw line and they'll be like, you can bet right now. FanDuel, go to FanDuel right now and bet this amount of money on whether he's going to make the free throw. It's really kind of very ingrained. That's the thing that's really changed. There was always gambling, obviously, but the dramatic thing that's changed has been the acceptance, not just within the game itself, but specifically by the leagues.
And, it's not legal in every state. It's like Shohei Ohtani's interpreter got in trouble for a lot of this stuff. Josh is shaking his head.
Yeah, his interpreter. It was only his interpreter that, I don't know. I won't go down the Shohei Ohtani conspiracy theory on it. We don't have time for this.
I heard all the conspiracies, and then I finally looked up how much money he'd gambled, and I was like, holy shit. That is
well, he also makes
so
quite
much.
A lot.
Yeah. But so it's not legal in California. Is that fair to say? Is it legal in most places?
My home state of Illinois has actually become legal there, to the point that if you go to a Chicago Bulls game, there's literally a place to bet on the game inside the United Center where they play the game. You can make a bet and then walk 5 feet to your seat and make a bet there. And that's all through the state. That's actually one of the reasons that Illinois famously had a terrible credit rating, has really boosted it. It really has. It was like this bankrupt state for decades, and they legalized gambling and weed, and it's all through the state. Yeah, exactly. We know how to do it in Illinois. And it really has been a huge boon for a lot of these states when they get that kind of government control over it. I think you're going to see more and more states. California, I think, has talked about it. Georgia, I think the general presumption is it's going to happen. If you've listened to one of those FanDuel ads, there's always that guy at the end that says, in Kansas, you have to do this. There's always, because all these different states have it. But I think generally speaking, there's so much money that's kind of get involved in. The downsides tend to be more for consumers rather than leagues or the states. So I think it makes it more likely that
the house always wins.
That's funny how it works that way. Those casinos don't get really tall and have all those flashy lights because they're losing money to people gambling. That's the general rule.
I'm a big sports fan, and I've been following this, and I played fantasy sports, and I had a friend who was a bookie back in college. So I was surprised at how surprised I was at how much this blew up after 2018. It seemed to be immediately, it was everywhere, all the time, all at once. You've obviously been covering sports for a long time and know way more about this industry than I do. Were you surprised at how quickly it was adopted by all the major leagues?
I was surprised how quickly the leagues were so willing and eager to throw themselves into it, particularly considering some of the scandals that, forget throughout sports history, have happened in the last 3 or 4 years.
Calvin Ridley in the NFL was a big one.
Without question. There was a player in the NBA who literally brought prop bets on himself, what he would do. What used to be able to, they've since banned this, but you used to be able to put a bet on yourself to play under a certain minutes of game. So he would go in, you could bet that this guy would only play 5 minutes or less. So
this guy rules.
He told a bunch of people that he's like, oh, I'm going to get in and then I'm going to fake an injury and go out of the game. And that's exactly what happened. And he has since been banned from the NBA for life. But I think he's actually serving prison time right now. So he certainly was damaged for that. But the point is that, like, someone like me, I will confess, I am not much of a sports gambler. I care about sports because, to me, the beauty of sports is if my team wins, I am happy. And if my team loses, I am sad. And nothing else in life is that simple. It's very easy for me. I enjoy that, right? Like, I get deeply emotional if my team wins, and I get very upset if my team loses. And then when it's over, I move on to something else. Maybe I have a good sandwich and I've forgotten all about it. That's the glory of sports for me. What's interesting is once you put the money, put this sort of gambling a thing on it, what you're doing not only is the thing you have to believe in sports is that the games are on the level. That's the fundamental rule of sports. Is if you think you're watching professional wrestling otherwise, which can have its pleasures, but I don't think you're like, oh, good, my favorite player won because he worked so hard and there was no other context to that at all. Sports is this thing where you have to be able to truly try to win the games. And so if you put that in danger, I was surprised that leagues were so eager to do that, considering the history of that. And I think we've seen the results of that in a lot of different ways. But once the leagues got involved, and they went all in on it, I was then not surprised that it was everywhere because that's where all the money is. And once they started doing deals with not just FanDuel, but I mean, if you watch with ESPN or any sporting event that you watch, gambling is now such a big part of it. And that's all because the leagues themselves are saying, we want to encourage this because we have financial considerations with these gambling companies.
And we even ran a feature, this was a while ago, about in-game betting and the fact that, plays like the NBA are saying, people will pay far more attention to this game. Advertising will then become even more lucrative, whatever, because they need to see if whoever makes that free throw. Shows how much I know about really beautiful explanation.
Wow, your sports knowledge is really
I'm actually
you are right, though.
I am correct. I know I'm right. I just said it with not as much confidence as I should have. Something that was really remarkable, and you opened your piece with it, is the fact that now people are encouraging college kids to start betting.
Yeah, that was wild.
Tell me about how these companies are basically operating to make sports gambling so ubiquitous.
There's basically two ways they're doing it. One is through active recruitment, which I live in Athens, Georgia, home of the University of Georgia. It's a major fraternity presence. Trust me, during rush week, you cannot miss all of the gambling companies giving out for free download, free $100 to bet here. It's a very encouraging thing that has actually led. I've spoke to people that work with the psychology of betting and work with people that betting addictions. They have seen a skyrocketing number of young people. Generally speaking, for years, people that have worked with Gamblers Anonymous, it's who you might imagine, generally people that are older.
Have sadder lives.
Yes, and yes, exactly. And you're seeing that so much more now with specifically young men, and that leads to the second part. So much of this is done on an app. There was before, in the days when it was just legal in Las Vegas, even if you had a bookie, someone still had to physically go up and take an amount of money and give it to someone behind a window and say, I think UCLA is going to win by 4. And that's what you had to do. Now, this is all on an app. I've talked to a lot of people that have gambling addictions, and they talk about how they don't think of the money they're putting in there as money. They think of it as almost ammo or points. And they don't and it can get so addictive that you don't realize, oh, I've actually just lost half of my nest egg, particularly for college students, which is a thing that you see a lot. And a lot of these apps are built through really the best practices that we see with any sort of app, right? The idea you're always encouraged to oh, what's that flashing button? What? Free? If I watch this ad, I'll get this free thing. We all do this with all sorts of different apps. But when you do this with gambling apps, what you're really doing is you're basically saying, don't you like this? Well, here, $100 of free betting, $100 of free betting. You're like, $100, I can't lose. It's free money. And next thing you know, it's $300 because you've hit this button and you hit this button. The gambling apps are very much incentivized to keep you gambling in a way that like doesn't even feel like gambling. I've talked to a lot of people that talk about how it feels like you're playing a game on your phone. A lot of people don't realize they even have like the notion of being a gambling addict until they start playing. But a lot of people don't realize this. And the next thing you know, they're kind of in the throes of addiction. But once you put these apps on the phones, it becomes so easy to do it. It can happen very, very quickly. We talk about these things like they're like niche or something like, this is a little thing that's going on in sports, but watch a sporting event. Like this is the central part of all of it. It's always very funny to hear I've written about sports for a very long time, and sports for years, like Al Michaels, the broadcaster, famously would make like little slide jokes, like if the line was 6.5 and the team was up by 4, and he's like, well, a lot of people in Vegas are curious to see if they hit this field goal. Wink, wink was like a thing that he did for years and years and years. Now, and it was like almost
no need for the wink. Yeah, no need for the wink.
Oh, forget that. Now the broadcasters are like, hey, so it's 50, score 17-10, and which means it's a good game. But you want to make it really interesting? I'll tell you what would make it really interesting. And like, check out the FanDuel app, check out the DraftKings app. It's so integrated into the broadcast now that even if you've never thought about gambling, I have a 13-year-old and a 10-year-old son.
Gambling addicts.
It is remarkable that my younger son.
Well, your kicker to the story was your son talking about the Knicks winning against the spread, which is just insane. Also, smart kid, but maybe apply that.
It's very strange. I'm just like, we were watching, because I'm a Knicks fan. We were watching a Knicks game, and basically the Knicks won by 7. I was like, awesome. I like the Knicks. I'm happy they won. Yay. But then he's like, yeah, but the spread was 9. And I was like, okay, are you able to experience joy? Can you have the actual feeling of enjoying a sporting event? And I think that's the thing, is I think it's really kind of indoctrinating is too strong of a word, but certainly it's putting a different notion in I think a lot of people. I forget my kid. I mean, this is something that's very common with college students, and they're a very target audience. Like I said, particularly young men, is that idea of all that really matters is how many points you get or how much money you get off in this. And I think it's not only, I think sports leagues have embraced this because there is so much money. Again, $4 billion. That's a lot of money that's come into this. I do think, however, long term, there's a lot of risk if you turn your game into not a game and almost like a profit-driven exercise, a game that there actually most people are fated to lose.
So you touched on mental health a little bit earlier. I watched a really bad Discovery documentary recently about gambling addicts. And I was on deadline and trying to procrastinate. And they did talk about the fact that gambling addicts have a higher suicide rate than any other addiction. And on top of that, people do not take it as seriously, which you kind of intimated, right? And on top of that, there's always this option for gambling addicts where it's like, well, I just need one win to make up for all my other losses. But tell me a little bit, and you already talked about this a bit earlier, but tell me a little bit about the effect of all this on people's mental health.
Yeah, I talked to a woman named Meredith Ginley. She's a clinical psychologist and she's worked directly with the gambling clinic. And she's talked about how it really doesn't feel real when you're doing this a lot. Like they'll gamble for a bit. Like remember, think about you get a push notification, right? Like, even if you've not thought about gambling for a while, there's still we've all gotten the, oh, I don't think you've checked this app for a while. Have you forgotten about his personal notification app? Imagine that for a gambling addict. Imagine what that kind of means. And a lot of times those push notifications can be enticing for people to resist when it's not gambling. Listen, leagues have been very standoffish about this. They put the little things at the end. They're like, hey, if you have a gambling problem and it's hopefully not too late already, call this number here. But generally speaking, they see this as a clear revenue stream. I mean, it's important to remember what leagues are. I think this gets lost sometimes. People think that leagues are they do have like Major League Baseball and the NFL. They have offices and they have buildings. But what leagues really are 32 billionaires in a room.
Yep.
Right?
That's correct.
Like that, that's exactly what leagues are. And I think it gets confused sometimes. We think of, the Dallas Cowboys, that's the football team. Actually, it's Jerry Jones's capitalization of all of his life's money. I think that's probably a better way to think about leagues. Like the commissioner of the NFL, Roger Goodell, does not have his job because he knows football really well or all the players love him. He has the job because his job is to constantly maximize revenue for the 32 billionaires that own those teams. And so while it's led, I think, in all sports, like a lot of American capitalism, really, you have to keep growing and you have to keep getting income streams. You have to keep going. So I think that's why they've embraced this so much at the cost of everything else. But I think we're seeing the after effects of that. And to me, the larger concern is in the long term. Like I watch sport, I've given so much money to the St. Louis Cardinals. That is my favorite baseball team. I don't even, my children probably will not go to college because I had to have a Paul Goldschmidt jersey from 3 years ago. So at a certain level, I recognize how silly all of this is. But I do that because I love this team and I have this irrational glory for them. What they're kind of training in a lot of ways is people to not think of the sports as diversion or entertainment or distraction from a stressful time. They're training them to be money-making things and kind of ways to almost entrepreneurial enterprises. And you're seeing this actually with the athletes themselves. So there's a Bernie Bickerstaff, who was a coach for the Denver Nuggets last year, spoke about how one thing that's happened a lot for him is when his team doesn't hit the spread, he gets like angry messages and angry calls. There have athletes been talked about how, hey, you missed that free throw. That cost me $500. Like athletes are seeing this from the outside on the field. And so it's really just been a drastic change in a very short amount of time that I think we're still kind of adjusting to the ramifications of.
Anyone who has any doubts about the veracity and violence of sports fans should just listen to 1 hour of local sports radio, a call-in show, and you'll get an idea of how much this can jack it up.
They were already fired up before they brought their wallets into it.
Yeah, exactly.
So you can imagine what there's now.
Our listeners may remember when my husband came dead last in his fantasy football league after a series of disastrous trades last year. And he had to watch 80 for Brady and then upload a YouTube review of it. So there was no money on the line. And it was already emotionally devastating for him.
Wait, I'm sorry. I did that anyway. That's the guy that got more views than me. That
was
more
my
views
prize
than your
for
husband.
winning my league.
Yeah, that was just my prize for getting to see 80 for Brady.
I gotta let you know about this movie. So
like and subscribe.
Setting aside the $4 billion on one side and then the crippling influx of gambling addiction on the other side, is there any other good things for the leagues or other leagues? Is it a good thing for sports in some realms?
There is money going into the games, and I don't mean to disparage that, right? Like the sports need to be healthy. There have been sports leagues that have failed. One of the people I've talked to was the commissioner of the Professional Lacrosse League.
Oh my God, I have the biggest crush on that guy.
Yeah, and he's a very nice guy. You know, I'm sorry. I wish you would have told me. I would have said something when I talked to him. I talked to him and he said, because they actually during the games, if you watch the games, they actually have an analyst that is there just to tell you about the betting stuff. They have gone all in on this stuff. And one of the reasons he talks about that is like, listen, not a lot, like I love lacrosse, but not everybody loves lacrosse. We are looking for any possible way to get people interested in this sports and so we can show them what to care about this sports. And so giving a lot of people argue, there's conflicting literature about this, but a lot of people argue that gambling does increase interest in the games themselves. The idea of like, if you are watching a game between two teams that you don't care about, you are more likely to tune in and continue watching if you have a little money on the idea. That's certainly the bet that the lacrosse commissioners talked about. He's the idea, like we encourage this because maybe someone that's never been introduced to lacrosse before, but is looking to bet on lacrosse, which to me sounds like someone that has a gambling addiction, if I'm being entirely honest.
I was gonna say.
But nevertheless, I do understand the concept, though. The concept of it is if if you're a small league like that, looking for any exposure you can find, this is something that a lot of people are doing, and a lot of eyeballs would be on you in that situation. Going into that, certainly the NFL, one of the main reasons the NFL, even before gambling was legal, has become the woolly mammoth of all American sports. It's a very easy sport to gamble on. It's an easy sport to watch on television. It's an easy sport to gamble on. I understand that there's many people that gamble on sports as a level of just to keep them interested in something they would not otherwise be interested in. This is entertainment. They do it when they don't have gambling problems. They just do it from time. That's a large percentage of the people that gamble on sports. So I don't mean to say that everyone that's gambling gambling sports has a problem or they're trying to destroy the entire fan base, a lot of people are able to handle this fine, and it does increase their interest in sports. So I think that's an argument for it. I just think it's one thing I would argue that it's one thing to get increased engagement from this. It's another thing to go so all in on gambling as sports leagues have that you couldn't escape it even if you wanted to.
What are the downstream effects of all this? Nationwide gambling problems, for sure. But what can we look forward to here?
Most of the moves with the gambling companies have been to try to capture market share. At a certain level, that will get saturated. Then you'll see a tightening. And that, I think that's probably in the short term, the idea. Eventually, these companies right now, they're able to operate on a loss because they're trying to get market share. What I'm curious about to see is what happens when they tighten their belts. But really, in all honesty, the thing that has changed this the most has been how foot first the leagues have been on this. It really is it's really remarkable. That has been, because once the leagues are in and accept this as a profit thing, then everybody's in. Everybody's incentivized to promote this constantly. Right now, they have given so much to the leagues. Eventually, they're going to want a little bit of that back. When that tightens and when that starts happening a little bit and the leagues aren't getting as much money from this for before, I'm curious to see if they pull back on this, particularly if there's another scandal at some point. I find it hard to believe that I think gambling will always be here and will always be legal.
Yeah.
This feels like more of a boomlet than just a massive thing. I'm not saying it's like, it's the Larry David crypto ads of the Super Bowl. We'll all laugh about that eventually.
I did love the Kick of Destiny.
There's a lot of great ads.
Very good.
There's a lot of great ads.
There's a lot to like. Yeah.
That's how you know it's a fad, because it has all the funny ads of the Super Bowl. That's how you know the thing is. But we'll see. It used to be, it was 20 years ago, it's pets.com and dumb internet ads.
And so that E-Trade baby's still going strong.
That E-Trade baby actually has a gambling problem now. It's actually a really sad thing. It's a very sad thing.
Well, this was great. We'll be right back with Keeping Tabs, but first, a quick break followed by my interview with Leaders We Deserve co-founders David Hogg and Kevin Lata.
What if I told you there was a new guide that helps innovators and entrepreneurs find their way to the Alabama outdoors? Well, there is. It's seekalabama.com. And it was started earlier this year by Innovate Alabama. SeekAlabama.com features an interactive map, numerous activities, and a ton of exciting articles. So, wherever you are, start exploring the beauty of Alabama today at SeekAlabama.com.
We all want the best of both. Dessert without calories, luxury without expense, and how about security without passwords? With Okta, it's possible. We secure identity for your business, so you can safely use any technology. You can build experiences that are richer and more secure, grow revenue without running up costs, and scale easily, no matter your tech stack. Enjoying the best of both? It's possible. It's Okta. Okta, the world's identity company.
With the election coming up in just a few days and everyone's anxiety about the presidential race going through the roof, we wanted to talk about what might be giving people more optimism down ballot. David Hogg and Kevin Lata are the founders of Leaders We Deserve, a grassroots organization dedicated to electing young progressives across the country. David is one of the survivors of the Parkland shooting in 2018 who went on to become an outspoken advocate for gun reform. Kevin, on the other hand, you might remember for running the successful congressional campaign for Maxwell Frost, the first Gen Z member of Congress. I sat down with David and Kevin after they spoke on stage at the Fast Company Innovation Festival in September. I guess to kick off the interview, and I know this is sort of a massive question, but how can younger candidates stand up to older candidates who have more quote-unquote structural advantage? And by that, I mean money. That was a big part of our piece. And what do you guys do to support those younger candidates?
That is a big reason why we wanted to start this. Mm-hmm. When you look at our government at all levels, it's dominated by much older people. And there's a lot of wisdom and experience that older people are able to offer, but young people are completely cut out from the conversation in a lot of ways in our government. And there's a reason why, and that's because young people don't have access to these political networks, to these donor networks. They aren't peers with people that have money that can invest in their campaigns. And a lot of times when you run for office, the first people that you're calling, and we call it the friends and family list.
Yeah,
you're calling your friends, you're calling your family. Those are the people that are going to be most likely to donate. And, even a lot of, national Democratic organizations, one of the first things that they look at when they're trying to recruit candidates is how much money can you raise from your friends and family list. And so with us, we recognized that was a huge barrier. David and I met on Maxwell Frost's campaign, who became the first Gen Z member of Congress. When he first got in, he was 24 years old. No one thought he really had a prayer. We were going against every major Orlando political leader. And we ended up raising $3.3 million, won by 10 points.
And in terms of raising, who were the family and friends giving you that $3.3 million?
So it wasn't a lot of friends and family, to be honest. Like we blew through that list very quick. I think Maxwell might have raised like $10,000, maybe 15. It's hard to say. But then you kind of just like get creative about, who are the donors that you're calling? What's your pitch? How are you handling objections? What's your follow-up? All of that stuff. And one of the things that we've been able to do well is bring kind of a systems approach to how do you run campaigns as effectively and as good as possible, and also coaching candidates. And I think that's one of the reasons why we've been able to sort of be successful.
So I want to come back to sort of running campaigns in a nimble way. But first, David, you said in the sort of cover story a while back that you don't want to fix democracy with one election, which I think is true. But what is your long-term strategy here? How do you think about that?
I think our long-term strategy is realizing that it comes back to what made March for Our Lives so powerful in 2018. The reason we were able to have the largest student protest ever in American history, with millions of young people marching with us, registering to vote with us, walking out of their schools with us to demand action on gun violence, wasn't because March for Our Lives had some huge bureaucracy of people around the country where we just knew all these people. We went out there and said, we're going to do this, and whether or not this movement succeeds or fails is entirely dependent on whether or not people stand up and be the leaders that we need in cities around the country to march. And that's why so many high schoolers stood up and said, you know what, I'm going to do this myself. And I think with Leaders We Deserve, what we're trying to do is the same thing, but on the inside of politics, where we're trying to find not just anybody because they're young, but truly generational leaders that can use the best form of leadership to build power possible, which is being inspiring to people, to give people their own agency to take charge themselves and be the change that they want to see. And the long-term view here is if we do our job right, hopefully in 10 years or less, there will be at least one version. No young person in America will be able to look at Congress or their state legislature and not see at least one person that reflects them, where they feel heard by them and they agree with them and they're fighting with them. And my hope is that we build such inspirational candidates that people take the initiative themselves and get to work to fix it, because there isn't any one person that's going to fix all this. It's going to take all of us getting to work to fix every part of it, whether that's campaign finance reform, whether that's passing gun reform, fighting climate change, or fighting for abortion rights. It's going to take everybody taking their own initiative and getting to work on that.
You sort of brought this up before, but young people are engaged, right? There was a tough survey that said 1 in 5 people expressed some interest in running. How do you make sure they follow through? What do those steps look like?
Well, I think a lot of it comes down to making sure that they know how to run in the first place. And for us, what that looks like is making sure that they get their signatures in on time to make sure that they're actually able to get onto the ballot, making sure that they're getting more of them than they legally need, so that when some of them are inevitably invalidated because somebody doesn't live in the district anymore or has passed away or whatever legal reason there is, that they're still able to get on the ballot. And then the other thing is, too, helping them work through financially the obstacles of running for office. In Texas, if you're running for state legislature and you're elected, you're going to be paid $7,000 a year. And you have to serve 6 months every 2 years in that legislature. There are not many people whose employers will let them take 6 months off every 2 years to go and do a completely different job, while also working part-time in the times when they're not in session to help do constituent services and stuff like that. So a lot of the work that we do is help these young candidates figure out how do they maintain their employment even while they're taking this much time off to go and be a state legislator. And we also help them figure out, as they're putting in the work, as they're working really hard to call people and ask them for money, go and knock doors, how they can maximize the return on investment that they have when they're making those calls so that they have the best lists possible and they're not just wasting their time.
What would you say is sort of Gen Z's biggest strength when it comes to winning elections or running campaigns? Like, what is something that you think they have that maybe other older candidates don't?
I think it's the ignorance to believe that it's actually possible a lot of the time.
Yeah.
In that we don't buy into the status quo. Like after Parkland, the reason we were able to change gun laws in Florida isn't because people said it was possible. It's because we had the audacity to believe it was possible. And if there's anything that this work has taught me, it's that the biggest obstacle to creating change rarely is whether or not it is actually possible. More than anything, it's whether or not everyday people think it is possible. And I think for our candidates, that's part of the power of them being so young is they have the audacity to believe that change is possible because they haven't been jaded by 20 or 40 years in politics. And they help to inspire a lot of older people and younger people to get out and vote for them because there's a surprising number of older people that are very, very supportive of younger people entering politics because there's kind of a sentiment of older people that think, my generation's just messed up.
Yeah.
It's time for some fresh blood to come in. And those are oftentimes some of the biggest supporters of these young people or people that are in their, 60s or 70s. And the other greatest asset that we have as a generation is just the righteous indignation that has come with being let down so much by our political system, whether that's school shootings, whether that's climate change, whether that's student debt or other systemic failures. And the fact that as a generation, we're not accepting that, but we're actively engaging and working to fix it by turning out and voting at the highest rates in American history of any generation that was our age. We hear a lot of the time from older people, especially, that tell me, young people just don't vote, and that's the problem. And it's true. We don't vote nearly enough as much as we should, but we are voting. Compared to any other generation before, we are voting at the highest rates ever in American history in the past 3 election cycles.
Now, Gen Z is also, a very digitally native generation. I'll say I'm a millennial. I got a smartphone when I was in 10th grade, I think.
Yeah.
I feel like a lot of Gen Z is getting them in middle school, right? I'm curious, do you work with them on sort of digital strategy? And I guess on the flip side, how do you think about stuff like misinformation right now?
Well, we do work with them on digital strategy. A lot of what I do is help to highlight the candidates on my social media to help give them a bigger platform. And we also help them realize that although social media and these other digital forms of communication are very important, a lot of the time, the voters that you're talking to, they're not going to be, you have such a wide reach with social media, and that's great, but you have so few people that are actually in your district that a lot of times it's more important to get back to the bread and butter of campaigning, which is just going and talking to people, knocking doors and having real conversations with them, because it's really hard to converse with somebody. There's so many echo chambers online. It's really hard to talk to the undecided voter when they're online. And it's much better when you're in person because you can have a real conversation with them rather than it being a very hyper-partisan echo chamber. And that's a lot of what we do is we work with our candidates to get them out and knocking doors. And I go door knocking with them as well.
Do you find a lot of undecided voters? Because the joke is in journalism that the New York Times will find the 7 people who don't know,
And I think there's a lot of truth to that for sure. So what's really interesting is we do polling in districts all across the country to sort of figure out, what is the approach that we should be taking to earn the votes of voters? What is the certain constituencies of voters that we need to be targeting? What are the people that are most moved by different messages? And, there's some districts where there's literally 0 persuadable voters, or it's like such a small percentage, like maybe 1%. There's other places. There's a district that we've done polling in Texas, and it shows the U.S. Senate candidate up like 13 points above Kamala Harris. It shows the state rep candidate 10 points above like the Republican state house candidate, 10 points above the Democratic one. So that's like a 20-point spread of people that are splitting their votes. So I think there's like sort of 2 different things here. It's like, one, people that are legitimately undecided and who have no idea, which I think those are probably a lot rare. But I think that there are more people that are willing to vote for a Democrat and Republican and can be convinced one way or the other. Again, it's not a huge amount of people, but
but it's a meaningful amount of people.
Sure, exactly.
Right? Is that fair to say? I'm curious, I want to go back to something David was bringing up, which is, the sort of ridiculously low pay people see for government work. Even like stipends for living when you go to DC are very low.
Sure.
There's two parts to this question. I guess the first is, how are you working to fix that now? Like, are you basically just telling people, here's how to make it work with your job? Are you raising money for them? What does that look like? And the second is, what are sort of the biggest structural changes you'd like to see in that area?
Yeah, I mean, like, there's a reason why people in our government are older and wealthier, because only those people can afford to make $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 a year.
And they might, after years in government, they might have access to some insider trading tips.
Sure, exactly. That's the thing. It exists. So, definitely there needs to just be a living wage for anybody that's in government. That's how you get working people. That's how you get regular people to be in government representing everyday people and the problems that they're facing on an everyday basis. And if you have a government that's just dominated by older, wealthier people, there's just like a level of insight that they're simply going to be missing. And that doesn't mean that they shouldn't be there. We just need to have a lot more diversity than that currently exists. So, as it relates to us specifically as one organization, our ability to like go to the Texas legislature and say, you need to do this is basically, it's extremely limited.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of politics around raising the salary for representatives. And there's a reason it is considered bad politics to be, because there has to be a vote for this to happen.
Yeah.
There has to be a bill.
And you don't want to vote for yourself to get paid more.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah.
So it creates a situation where these votes never happen, or people are voting against it to get their political points. And they don't care anyways because they're millionaires.
Yeah, because they're already rich.
So it doesn't even matter. And, for us, the way that we try to attack the problem is, so for example, on Maxwell Frost's race, he was Ubering like 9 p.m. to 1 a.m. 5 days a week. Like that is not ideal. I think he racked up a crazy amount of credit card debt. I think he got his credit cards cut off at some point. It was a very difficult situation. At one point in the campaign, he wasn't able to find like an affordable place. So he was just sleeping on people's couches in the middle of this congressional campaign, working like 16, 17, 18 hours a day. So I think for us, these are not ideal situations, obviously, but we try to connect our candidates with other state representatives who are kind of going through the same thing to just like get advice and try to help create networks for people to sort of figure out this problem. And to the degree that we can kind of like try to help people find jobs where they can get some sort of stipend, or a retainer work where they're not doing a lot, but they're able to make a decent amount. We try to do that as well.
Yeah, that makes sense. You brought up Maxwell Frost. I think he's very charismatic. He's a very compelling character. I'm curious how you think about spotting that talent and cultivating it.
So we just started the organization a year ago.
Yeah.
You're
like, please.
Well, no, it's something that's extremely important to us. And I think we think it's absolutely critical to our being successful and carrying out what we want to do. So within this first year, so much of what we were focused on was just who are the people that are kind of like already running and identifying those folks and trying to support people that we think could be really remarkable and make a real difference in their communities and in their states. But, next cycle, we're building out like a pretty big recruitment operation. And I think one thing that is sort of difficult to sort of like suss out is there's some people that already sort of like have, that sort of thing about them that can be really special, whether they're like an activist in their community or like a community leader or something, something along those lines. But there's some people that are just simply going to grow into this. Yeah. And that, it's definitely not an easy thing. And I think a lot of it is very subjective. And so we've mapped out all the different places where there could be possible retirements because people are more on the older side.
Although it takes a lot for some people to retire in government.
That is true. That is
you
true.
You could be on death's door and still be serving.
So you could be 70, like, I got 15 more years left in me,
exactly. You're like, I have Alzheimer's and that's okay.
Yeah. It's crazy that, there's a long history of people passing away.
Absolutely.
While in office.
While in office.
Which, that's not how this
It's not what we want. Yeah.
Exactly. It's not what we want. So we try to map that out based on where we think possible retirements are. Something like, this isn't the exact number, but it's like 50% of the states in the country have term limits. So we're mapping out like, okay, where are the seats where this person is going to be termed out and this is going to be an open seat, to try to kind of at least get some sort of picture of where these places can be. And then a lot of it is just simply calling around, like calling the state parties. And, we'll go down to the district and kind of like meet people in person. And
then it's kind of vibes from there.
I mean, that's a decent part of it. You want to see people in their element. You want to see, one of the things that we found is that running for office, I mean, it is a tremendous amount of work and sacrifice, and there's a lot of discipline that is involved in needing to do that. And there's a lot of people that just aren't prepared for that sort of thing, as you could probably imagine. I mean, it's all consuming. You're subjecting yourself to like...
Absolutely. I find it hard to meet deadlines at work. Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's a grueling process. Now, you also have some PACs. What's the process been like to raise money for both of those?
The vast majority of our money is from grassroots donors. So our average donation is $28. So we were able to build out a pretty massive grassroots donor network that I feel really proud of, because it's not easy. There's a lot of PACs that sort of start up and they often just like close, or they end up not raising a lot of money. And at this point, we're at, I think, $9 million raised in a year and a month. And, we're still going until the end. And, that's the sort of money that can really make a difference in these races. And it's so exciting, because I feel like you hear stories all the time where there's like the super exciting person, but then they came in last place, or like they lost and everybody wanted them. But then like, the shittier person won.
100%.
And you're just like, okay, damn, that sucks. And like, we want to try to be in a situation where we're limiting that. And like, these people that can really be generational leaders can get into office and really impact their communities and states and our country.
What's been the most effective way to reach those grassroots donors?
We do digital ads on like Facebook, YouTube, different digital platforms where people can click and sort of donate. I mean, at any given time, I think probably like most companies, we're probably running like 15, 20, 25 like different kind of like ad campaigns. So that's one thing. We do text messages, we do emails.
You do all the campaign stuff.
We do all the campaign stuff.
I guess I thought maybe there was like a different strategy, because I feel like everybody's trying to reach grassroots donors.
Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of it is people really believe in this idea, number one. Two, there's a lot of people that really believe in David and his vision and everything that he's went through. And I mean, with March for Our Lives, I mean, it was the second largest march in American history, just after the March on Washington. Maybe the Women's March, maybe that would have been second, maybe his was third, I can't remember. And, I just remember back in 2018 working on campaigns, Democrats, I mean, before Parkland, no Democrats were supporting an assault weapons ban. I mean, it was just like something that you stayed away from. You didn't talk about guns. And now we're in a situation
Michael
where...
Bloomberg always had that campaign, but it didn't do that much.
I think he made a real impact, but I think the way people see ending gun violence in the Democratic Party is just vastly different than it was before Parkland. And I think, I mean, David and the survivors and the students played an incredible role, and people marched all across the country demanding change, and there's so much work to do, but they were incredibly successful.
My last question, David, I'll ask you first, or you two can answer it together. What are some of the next steps for the organization? What are you looking forward to over the next year?
I'm looking forward to recruiting our next class of candidates.
That's what we were just talking about.
Yeah.
I'm really looking forward to that. And I'm looking forward to seeing all the great work legislatively our candidates are going to do in their first terms in office, and figuring out of those candidates which ones are really performing the best, so we can then start thinking about potentially what higher office could look like for them if they decide that they want to do that.
And I think also, like, one of the things that we're really excited about is, as David mentioned earlier, when talking about like TikTok or social media, in order for these people to win, they need to focus on earning votes from people in their district. And I think sometimes social media can be somewhat of a distraction.
Yeah, you can be really popular globally, but not.
Yes. And it's actually super sad because it happens like where people that do like have a decent amount of followers on TikTok, they're doing TikToks all the time, and then they lose pretty bad. And I'm not saying they're directly connected by any means, but...
No, I mean, I have this joke with a bunch of other journalists where it's like journalists who are good on Twitter often like right
Really?
when they handed a feature, you're like, guys.
I never even thought about that. That's interesting.
I'm
but
always
it
like,
makes
you gotta
sense.
stay off Twitter and do your work.
So which are you? Are you a tweeter or are you?
I'm not. I think the reason I adopted this position is because I'm horrible on Twitter.
Okay.
You know, it's like a self-survey.
Yeah.
I also
Deal
don't
with your
hand in
cognitive
great
dissonance.
copy. I'm sort of bad on both levels, but
You're good at talking, though.
exactly.
So there you go.
But this was great. Thank you both so much for coming on the podcast.
Thank
Pleasure.
you.
Okay, we are back with Will, and it's time to wrap up the show with Keeping Tabs. This is where each one of us shares a story, a trend, piece of pop culture we're following right now. And Will, since you're our guest, what are you keeping tabs on?
So this Sunday, I am running the New York City Marathon. It's my first marathon. I've never done it before, and I'm terrified. I mean, it's really, this was a horrible idea. I don't know why I did this to myself. Never mind. Delete this. I'm not doing it. But I've discovered the New York's run by the New York Road Runners Association, nyrr.org. They actually, I did not realize this until I was really going. I will be able to be tracked in real time by anyone, and all racers are, be able to track in real time by anyone that wants to look it online, which is like now as if I wasn't scared enough to do this. Now I can.
My sister opted out of it, but she told me I am allowed to track her phone.
Oh my God.
Oh, okay, fair. I just want to track someone who's like starting and then they're stopping, and it's like, like get push notifications
that's exactly
of like
right.
running, walking, puking.
Yeah.
I know there's going to be like a high school enemy of mine that's like, he slowed down.
Oh, yeah.
He slowed down. Or like, it's going to be really
a 9-minute mile.
Yeah.
Weak.
Oh, well, look at that. Well, I guess that's why Melanie liked me more.
Yeah.
So
me and Josh will be watching you. Will be like little bitch with his negative splits.
While I'm eating Doritos on the couch, watching the NFL.
How did he vanish off the Verrazano Bridge? I don't know how that happened.
Josh, what are you keeping tabs on?
Well, I'm keeping tabs on the state of bronze statues made of sports stars. Did you both see the new Dwayne Wade statue that they unveiled outside of the Miami Heat arena? What is happening?
Yeah.
With whatever artist they're commissioning to make specifically the faces of these sports stars is wild. So for anyone who didn't see, the Miami Heat unveiled this bronze statue of Dwayne Wade doing his famous "This Is My House" celebration from, and I think it was like 2009. It's a very famous like Dwayne Wade clippable moment. The face looks like Dan Bongino. Like, that's what it looks like.
Oh, wow. That's really correct. I was wondering why I was so terrified.
The reactions are always great when this happens. I remember back to like the bust of Cristiano Ronaldo.
Yeah.
That was another famous one.
So good.
Dwayne Wade gets up and he's like, wow, this is crazy. Who is that guy?
Yeah, it's that guy, yeah.
And I think it was saying it trying to be like nice about it, but also was like everyone was like, yeah, who the fuck is this guy?
Oh my God.
Anyways, that's my moment of zen for this week.
Imagine you make it. You did it, and you look up, you're like, oh my God, that doesn't even freaking look. It looks like Dan Bongino. What is going on? Oh, that's awful.
I think that's funnier. I would rather have an ugly statue of me.
Yeah.
I mean, it's amazing. It's really amazing. It's so ugly. Yaz, what are you keeping tabs on?
Yeah, so for our listeners who don't know, I'm writing a big feature on the WWE for our winter issue, and I went to see some more wrestling at the Barclays Center on Friday night. Had a great time. Sad Roman Reigns didn't throw any punches. But that same day, I read a feature by Reeves Weidman in New York Magazine. He's been a guest on the show. He's so great. Friend of the pod, Reeves Weidman, about the NFL's concussion crisis. He's talking about Tua Tagovailoa.
Yeah.
Incredibly fucked up situation. Also goes back to what you were saying about the NFL being primarily a money-making machine. I think if they cared about the well-being of their players, maybe everybody would be wearing a concussion cap, or at least that man would be. I got really freaked out by the possibility of concussions in the ring, too. My great uncle was a famous wrestler and body slammed his roommate because of CTE.
Yeah.
So I know it's bad. But yeah, it's just made me think a lot about it and how messed up it all is. It's a bit of a downer to end the episode, but that is...
I always blame the NFL for this, but like the thing is that like Tua came back this week. That's a large part of what Reeves' piece about. It was a really great piece. And for the record, the main thing I heard from your average NFL fan was like, oh, good, I can put him back in my fantasy lineup.
Yeah. Great.
And
Yeah.
I think that is what I think until that stops happening, the NFL can say like, oh, we're going to put concussion taps and we're going to make it safer.
Well, he's not even wearing one of those.
Yeah.
That's what's crazy to me.
It's just a brutal game, and as long as we all still like it, and frankly, I do, and I think probably a lot of people do, until people stop watching it at a certain level, like, everyone's like, oh, I feel so terrible for Tua. But like he did have 2 touchdowns, and I really needed that this week for my league, and I think that's
I really gave a boost to Tyreek Hill in my lineup over there.
That is how we speak. That's how we think in football, and I think it's probably how we always will.
There was like a moment, I think, a few years ago when the concussion stuff seemed to reach a fever pitch that people were like, "Oh, was this the beginning of the end for the NFL?" Not the
That's
end,
what
but
this piece is about. Yeah.
Yeah. Would it go the way of boxing? And
then sports betting came along, and
yeah. I mean, honestly, like I think that we've learned. We're like, that's terrible. Just don't bring it up again, okay? Because and I think that's what people have ultimately made.
Yeah. Well, bit of a downer to end the episode, but Will, thank you so much for coming on the show. And that's it from us Innovative Companies. Our show is produced by Avery Miles and Blake Odom, editing by Matt Toder, mix and sound design by Nicholas Torres, and our executive producer is Josh Christensen. Remember again to subscribe, rate, and review, and we'll see you next week.